Great. Well, good morning, everyone. I hope that you had a lovely evening last night and are ready to go this morning. We're going to be inspired and amazed and reassured that our hearts are in the right place and that we can effectively reach people about protecting wildlife. So today, our session starting out this morning is interpretation to address wildlife issues. And we are honored to have Jim Covel, retired director of training and interpretation from the Monterey Bay Aquarium, share his expert techniques for staying positive and effective while interpreting wildlife viewing etiquette for visitors to California's coast. Jim Covel has been a friend to California State Parks and Wildlife and many other partners, agencies, and millions of people for many years at the aquarium. And he definitely, every time he's done a training that I've attended or training for our sea life stewards, I am inspired, I am in awe, and I'm refreshed. So I'm really needing today as well. So I'm glad you're all here. We're going to have a chance to share and ask questions throughout the session with Jim. I'll be monitoring the chat. So, you know what might help me is if you have a question, is to start your question with a capital letter Q, just Q, and then write your question. So comments, you don't need to do that, but for questions, that'll help it stand out to me so I can make sure to get them to Jim in a timely fashion. He'd like to address it when it comes up organically with you instead of waiting to the end. And then there will be time at the end. So without further ado, I'd like to hand the microphone to Jim Covel.
All right, thanks, Kara. So welcome, everybody. I see some familiar names and faces there joining us this morning. And for those of you that I've worked with in the past, I apologize if I'm doing anything repetitive this morning, but I think it's all good stuff that we can all benefit from. And just a little bit by way of where I'm coming from on this, although I spent the last 33 plus years at the aquarium, I really came out of a wildlife background. I grew up on the nation's oldest wildlife refuge, which is here in the background on my slide. And I always like to toss this out because nobody knows what it is. This is actually Lakeside Park, Lake Merritt in Oakland, California. And it was set aside as a waterfowl refuge by the state of California in 1868. So it goes way, way, way back. And I spent my younger years around Lake Merritt helping out with banding and a lot of wildlife interpretation. And after college, I spent about 12 years working as a park ranger. So I have that kind of field interpretation and enforcement background as well. So I have a pretty good sense of the kinds of things that we deal with. And what I'd like to do is talk about some strategies for using interpretation to address wildlife issues. Even though I've done some enforcement work in my ranger days, I always found that was not the best strategy for a lasting solution to wildlife disturbance issues. So, and what I'm going to share with you today actually is something that we actually train a lot of rangers with as well in different states around the country. So this is a pretty universal approach to things. Let me get my screen up here. And so we're going to be talking about this strategy called the authority of the resource. And the idea is that we have all of this wildlife out here and they really can't speak for themselves. That is up to us. And so rather than tell people what they can and cannot do with wildlife, sometimes starting from the perspective of here's the animal's situation and how our actions impact animals. So it's really coming from an education and interpretation standpoint. And it usually has pretty lasting effects. So let's take a look at some examples of approaching things from this authority of the resource. And the first thing I'm going to talk about is the Home Alone situation. I guess there's another version of Home Alone coming out here soon. I'm going to have to update my poster from the movie. But really, the poster child I'm going to use for this isn't Macaulay Culkin. It is a situation that we deal with a lot around Monterey Bay. I'm sure it's kind of universal up and down the coast, where you have people that like to go out surf fishing, poke pole fishing. They're out around the rocky shore, uh, just exercising one of their favorite hobbies, fishing, trying to catch dinner. But in the process, they can have some unintended impacts. And one of my favorite examples is our friend, the oyster catcher. And there's a lot of concern about oyster catcher nesting success and disturbance. And it goes back to that home alone theme, where you've got oyster catchers and they are nesting, and they've picked a nice, seemingly isolated spot way out there on the rocks where people are going to leave them alone. And yet you have somebody coming along, creeping along the rocks, poke poling or whatever it is that's bringing them out there into the oyster catcher's territory. And the oyster catchers take off. And neglecting that nest is one thing, that's bad enough. But then we have the situation where we have lots of other friends that are eager to move in on that nest. So as soon as the local gulls, and in our area, we have an increasing number of crows in the intertidal also. I don't know what that's about, but it's getting to the point where the crows are chasing the gulls off in some cases around here in Pacific Grove. Either way, the minute mom and dad oyster catcher have moved away from the nest, even if there's somebody fairly close by, then we have these other predators willing and eager to move in and take those eggs. And they often do. And then that nest is destroyed. So you wind up with a situation where somebody quite innocently pursuing some leisure time in the out of doors winds up costing the oyster catchers their whole year's reproductive effort. And that only has to happen a couple of times in an area before you see the nesting success and the population overall really start to be impacted. So in explaining that to somebody, rather than going up and saying, hey, get off the rocks, you can't be around here, approaching folks and say, while you're having a good time out here, you're having an impact on creatures that you probably haven't even noticed around you here, but you might be wiping out their entire family. And I like to use some of those words like family and home, because everybody gets that, and they have a real emotional impact on us also. So when we talk about breaking up the family, being a home wrecker, those kinds of things, it's a little tongue in cheek, but the reality is that's what we are doing without intending to do so. And in my experience, most people really want to do the right thing. They aren't out there to harm wildlife, but they're doing things without the knowledge and intention to have an impact. But just the same, it does have that impact. So by educating people about the fallout from some of their activities, they can be a lot smarter about what they do. They can be on the lookout. And, I've found, especially in my work as a ranger, that those people are often converted into wildlife protectors, and they became some of my best volunteers or some of my best helpers out there in terms of helping to educate other people. So there's kind of a multiplier effect when you do this successfully. And I don't think there's anybody on our call today who would say, I don't need any help in what I'm doing. We are perfectly well staffed to cover all the bases here. That's not the case. And the more eyes and ears and voices we can get out there to help carry this message to others, and that just extends our good work even further. So this is the home alone kind of phenomenon, and it can go with any nesting site, any protected site along the shoreline. If we disturb the normal occupants there and they flee, then we kind of leave it open for other things to happen, other impacts. In this particular case of other birds coming in and robbing the nests, that resonates with a lot of people. Sometimes I've even used the analogy, while you're out here fishing or collecting mussels or whatever you're doing, What if your kids were home alone and there was somebody stalking around your house, looking at taking your kids? You'd freak out. And so, none of us would want that to happen. And yet we're kind of creating a similar situation with the oyster catchers or the plovers or whatever the bird is that we might be talking about. So one example of how you can use that authority of the resource to get people to understand what's really going on. Let's tackle another one here. Everybody's favorite animal. I mean, and of course, every presenter knows you always need a golden retriever in every program that you present. That just builds audience empathy. But I have another reason for putting the golden retriever in here as well, because our lovable pets that we love dearly, and I'm sure most of you know where this is going. And when we go out to recreate, a lot of us like to bring pets with us. I mean, they're part of the family. Why shouldn't they join in the fun? So our pets wind up out there on the beach with us or in a variety of open spaces with us. And of course, once they get out in the out of doors, then their wild ancestry tends to come out as well. And a lot of owners think that's just amusing. It's, oh, look, Rover likes to chase the shorebirds or chase the gulls or chase the birds off the beach. And so we think that's exercise for the pet. And it's kind of amusing to watch them and their interaction with the wildlife and to see how the wildlife responds to them. But at the same time, the perspective from the animals, and again, I'm going to use the snowy plover as our poster child for this one. That's a big predator. That isn't your golden retriever. That is the beach wolf out there. And they are concerned about their own safety and their nest and their young, if they have hatchlings there. And here comes the beach wolf, and they freak out. They panic, just as you would if you were pursued by some big predator that you'd want to get the heck out of there. And so with our dogs exercising, running up and down the beach as we would like to do as a responsible pet owner, we're actually having a real impact on snowy plovers and pretty much any other bird on the beach. Any bird out there is going to see this giant predator coming after them and panic, and they're going to flush. And we'll talk about energy budgets here a little bit later on. But every time we disturb a wild animal, we're also tinkering with its energy budget. And if you do that very often, you can have a real serious impact on these animals. And of course, any of you that work around a sandy beach environment know and probably have dealt with the impact of dogs on the beach and snowy plovers. And I know for rangers, it's boy, we've had these conversations so many times with folks, and they get upset because, hey, I'm just being a responsible dog owner, and this is my beach, and my tax dollars paid for this, and why can't I bring my favorite partner out here on the beach to join me in a little fun, just romping on the beach? And so it's perfectly innocent and well meant from the owner of the animal. So kind of describing that other perspective may help balance that out. And I'm not saying you're a bad pet owner or that you're not being good to your dog, but since you have a dog, that tells me you really like animals. And so as an animal lover, and you got a really cool dog there, obviously you take good care of it. But as an animal lover, there's other animals out here on the beach also, and they may not enjoy your dog as much as you or I enjoy it. And so again, you're in alignment with the person you're talking to rather than in opposition to them. And that's an important thing in the authority of the resource, is finding where that common ground is and appealing to the values of the person you're talking to. And then you're helping to motivate them to change their behavior based on their own closely held values. And that's going to be way more successful than saying, well, you can get a citation for running your dog on this beach there. Didn't you see the sign back there by the parking lot? I tell you, that just engenders, well, everything from, okay, I'll make sure I don't see the Rangers truck parked out here the next time I bring my dog to the beach, or how to sneak around it, or I don't care, or I hate Rangers. You have a whole variety of bad outcomes that can come from a more heavy-handed approach. But somebody that walks up, engages you in conversation, compliments your dog, and compliments you as a responsible pet owner and an animal advocate, now we're in the same square and we can have a really productive conversation about what you can do on the beach and what might not be the best time or the best place. And here's another place you can run your dog, you can get some exercise where you won't have that same impact. Giving people an alternative is really helpful as well. So that's the giant predator, the beach wolf. And I'm sure most of us, if we have a beach, we deal with beach wolves out there. So let's talk about energy budgets here for a minute. So every wild animal has a certain amount of resources to work with, and they have to eat the right food, get the right nutrition, get the right amount of rest, have the proper shelter in order to be successful out there. And if any of those things are lacking, the animal can suffer pretty quickly. And any of you that work with wildlife already know all of this, that providing the right shelter and making sure they've got access to good food and water resources and so on is really going to help ensure the survival of those species, those particular individuals. But here's the thing. If every time that animal has to do something that burns some energy, then it's burning calories that were hard to come by because they have to work for the food to provide those calories, to provide that energy. And most of those animals are getting just enough energy. Excuse me. Most of those animals are getting just enough energy to satisfy their basic needs. And if they are reproducing, if they are raising a family, if they are trying to heal from an injury, those are additional demands on their energy and that very close energy budget that they have that are really drawing them right down to that very, very thin margin. And if they get pushed too far, they start using more energy than they consume. And so then they are starting to tap into any reserves they have. A lot of times those reserves are fairly thin. And so an animal can go over the edge, and it can actually be not only harmful, it can be fatal to animals. So I like the budget analogy because we all have a budget, and you know that you have a certain amount of money in the bank, and you've got that money to spend on your basic needs and anything you wish, until you take all the money out of your bank account. And at that point, then you go into a deficit, and you might have some reserves you can pull from someplace else. But you can't run at a deficit indefinitely. You break your budget. And so that analogy holds up really well with animals, that all wild animals have an energy budget that they operate on. And every time we create a disturbance, then we're causing them to use energy that otherwise is reserved for nesting or for foraging for food to help replenish their energy budget, and or for migration for different species. So we really can't afford to be impacting the energy budget of animals. So let me give you a good example here. One that if you're anywhere in the range of the otter and those around a Monterey Bay or Morro Bay or other areas up and down the coast in between, have kind of an ongoing challenge with people that love sea otters. And you wouldn't think that would be a challenge, except that we like to get really close to the things we love. And so in a lot of cases, that means, how can I paddle up to a sea otter? If there's one out on the beach, how can I get close enough to it to get a good photo? I watch people in kayaks trying to get up close to do selfies with otters. And you see an otter out there in the kelp bed resting. And it's a chance. Wow, that we can sneak up a little closer to this animal, get a better look at it. That is our human nature. It's our curiosity. We like to get close to wildlife, and so we're pursuing that curiosity, and that seems really innocent. If anything, it's an expression of how much I love this animal. So that can be a real positive thing, motivating people unless they understand otherwise. And that's where, again, some interpretation, helping them get this whole energy budget thing, can be a good way to really help them understand. In the case of otters, we know that the minute we get close enough to an otter to actually change its behavior, doesn't have to dive, it doesn't have to swim away, just popping up and looking at us. Okay, that otter's no longer sleeping. Now it's jumped to a higher energy state and it's burning more calories. And as you already know, otters burn a lot of calories every day anyhow, and they have no storage. They don't have that layer of adipose to draw upon. Reserves are pretty slim if you're a sea otter, and you count on getting a certain amount of food every day, which is a challenge in a lot of places. And you count on having enough spare energy to groom and maintain yourself. And the rest of the time is downtime, where you are trying to rest and sleep and conserve your energy. So you live within your energy budget. And in most places, otters can hopefully be pretty successful with that until they start having uh, to swim away, to evade people out on the water, or evade people that are on the beach. Once they start to flush, even once they wake up and look around, now they're starting to burn energy. And you wouldn't think, for the average person in a kayak, well, the otter just looked at me, that can't be that big a deal. But geez, look at how many other people are out here today, and how many times has that otter had to pop up or dive? And maybe there are other people that aren't as considerate as you are. They got close enough to actually drive that otter away. And so now that otter's burning energy, it means it's got to eat just that much more today. And otters are already spending a lot of their time trying to forage and get enough to eat. So let's step it up one more notch here, and let's add a pup into the picture. So now you've got an otter mom with a pup, and she's not only trying to maintain herself, which is pretty much a full-time job for otters, but she's trying to provide enough resources for this pup to stay alive and to grow and develop. And that often means that female otters are actually running at an energy deficit already. Every day with that pup, they're burning a little bit more energy than they can take in. And maybe if they're living in a really fabulous habitat, they can get enough food to really do well with themselves and their pups. But what we often see is otter moms are slowly losing weight. They are tapping into their own internal resources just to provide enough for their pup and keep themselves alive. And they are right on the knife edge of running it at a deficit. They are running at a deficit, and they get to the point where they're running at that edge where they can go over the edge and die. And there's been a few studies looking at otter moms and finding that by the time they wean their pup, they are just barely able to hang on. And that might be one of the things that drives weaning the pup is, okay, mom is totally out of gas. I have nothing else to give. You're on your own now, kid. I've got to start replenishing my own resources or I'm going to perish. And then just to add a little bit more to that, we get male otters that start pursuing females to mate with them shortly after weaning. And so that's an extra energy drain on the females. And that can actually kill females. It can push them right over the edge. So now flipping that back around to our audience, well, you see an otter mom out there with a pup. Who wouldn't love to get a closer look at that? I mean, boy, that's just as big a magnet as we can have out there on the water. And so a mom with a pup is a especially attractive target for kayakers, and I hate to crumb on kayakers, but there are others. I've seen divers, and now that we have more and more otters hauling out on beaches, almost anybody up and down the beach may also wind up disturbing otters, and once in a while, even a mom with a pup that is near the beach. So it takes a little bit of doing to help somebody understand that by loving this animal, they could be killing it. But that is the honest truth. And there's empirical data going back a couple of decades or more to show that can actually happen. And we understand that phenomenon more and more now. So I've spent a lot of time at the aquarium talking to people on the deck while we watch people out in the water interacting with otters. And while I'm not talking to kayakers, I'm talking to somebody that sees that and says, wow, you know, I think tomorrow we're going to go rent a kayak and go out there where we can get closer to those otters. So we have a chance, even from the shore side, to have a real impact on this activity. And, you know, if I can convince a few people of that, then they may talk to other kayakers, talk to others in their own party going out kayaking or going out on the water. And maybe they can help us spread the word and be a little more respectful of otters and literally avoid killing otters, especially females with pups out there. I do want to add in working with our local kayak rental organizations around Monterey Bay. They do an outstanding job. And I know, Jenna, you've been really involved in this also, helping people that provide kayaks and provide water access to really educate folks before they go out there on the water. And I think that has made a huge difference. That is a good time to reach everybody before they even get out there. So I know we're doing a lot to impact this issue, and we need to keep those efforts up. But maybe talking about energy budgets is yet one more piece of ammunition we can use when we're interacting with people that are heading out on the water, so that they're a little bit more respectful of the otters. And the same could be true every time your dog runs up and down the beach and flushes shorebirds that are out foraging on the beach. Those birds have to get up and fly. And some of them will just hop away a little farther. Sometimes the dog will chase them and it's hop, hop, hop down the beach. Sometimes they're flying some distance. Flight consumes a huge amount of energy for birds. And a lot of our shorebirds may be migrating through where they are stopping right now on the beach to try and forage and build their reserves for the next leg of the migration. And instead of being able to forage and build their reserves, they're actually burning more energy on the beach, trying to get away from those beach wolves and all of us on the beach. And they're not building the reserves they need to migrate. And then they run out of gas as they are headed further along their migration route. So this whole energy budget idea is really kind of a key concept in terms of wildlife disturbance, because it applies in almost every case with wildlife disturbance. And again, for an analogy, you can just talk about, most of us have experienced those days when we are just beat and it's like, I just have to get home and go to bed. I have nothing left to give. And or you're feeling totally exhausted and you finally get some food in you and you can rest a bit. And it's like, okay, I'm good to go again for a while. Animals go through that same thing. And so we can kind of relate to that. Most of us wouldn't drive ourselves to the point of exhaustion where we are likely to die. But in wildlife, that can be the case if we push them too far. All right, let's talk about another thing that more and more we get to deal with now. And this is, and boy, these are everywhere now, the ever-present drones, and they are so accessible. People can get them anymore. The prices are very reasonable, and they are a lot of fun. And boy, if I like to take pictures of animals, just think of how cool it would be if I could get overhead and get some close-up pictures of them from a perspective that I couldn't reach any other way. So I know I'll get myself a drone and get some pictures of those seals out on the beach or whatever it is. And I think there are increasing regulations about using drones, certainly around state parks, around national marine sanctuaries. The bulk of the public is not probably is not aware of those rules or doesn't understand them. And once again, the rules don't necessarily change behavior. So helping people understand what the impact of that drone can be is employing that authority of the resource. So let's get the animal's perspective on this. Any big thing moving overhead, if you're pretty much any wildlife species, is a threat. Okay, that's danger is going to swoop down on you from overhead. And in that drone and the weird noise it makes and darting around in the sky, it's like, who would not be afraid of that? And you know, it triggers that instant predator, just like the beach wolf triggers that instant predator reaction. I've got to get out of here. And so flushing, hiding, all that escape. Again, animals can injure themselves in that process. And at the very least, they are breaking their energy budget trying to escape. And it may chase them away from a nesting site. It may disrupt, in the case of mammals, moms with pups out there on the beach. We see all kinds of impacts from drones.
Jim, I have a question.
Sure.
From Colleen. It says, do you have any suggestions for starting a conversation / engaging with someone who has just caused a disturbance but appears to be in a hurry and not interested in chatting?
Yeah. And of course, if they're in a hurry and they're getting out of there, then maybe your problem is solved. But if they are just trying to avoid you, yeah, and again, trying to start with something that might be a little bit higher priority for them. So something in terms of, wow, I haven't seen anybody operating a drone before, or that's pretty cool, or what are you looking at out there? And so people are usually pretty happy to talk about themselves, although with you approaching them, they may feel guilty, like, uh-oh, maybe I screwed up. Maybe I wasn't sure I should be doing this, and I guess maybe I shouldn't. So they may be already on guard when you approach them. And that makes it even more important to have a real friendly, outgoing approach, you know, and hey, how you doing today? And welcome to the beach. And wow, looks like you're having a good time here. And you know, what have you been seeing with that? And so that's going to put the interaction on a different footing. The person isn't going to be on their guard anymore. They, wow, this seems like a friendly person that's kind of interested in me and what I'm doing. And then you work the conversation around to, you know, that the drones are really cool. And I have seen some amazing images from drones. However, let me fill you in on a couple of other things we've noticed here. And obviously, if you look like somebody that's a huge fan of wildlife. And so anytime you can find to compliment somebody, then they're happy to listen to you. So starting those conversations off, finding a positive way, even though you might be just barely simmering under the surface in terms of, I just want to throttle this person, try and hold that in the background. Just say, hey, that's pretty cool. What are you seeing with that? And then try and move the conversation toward, you know, while you're looking at the seals are looking at you also. And here's what they might be seeing. And so from the seal standpoint, through a seal's eyes, that thing can be kind of scary. And so, you know, it takes a little bit of practice, and especially those of us that are real wildlife advocates, again, you just want to run down there and knock that thing out of their hands and say, hey, knock that off. But that isn't really going to get you compliance in the long run. So it takes a little bit of practice, and we'll talk about those interactions in just a minute, because how we interact with people, sometimes we have to change our basic nature a little bit to do that successfully. So with the drones, again, it's as well meant as it might be. People that admire animals, they just want to get a closer look, a different perspective. They want to capture something to show their friends, so they've got a good story to tell from their visit to the shore. those are all good motivations, but how they go about it, and in the absence of understanding that broader perspective, they can create some real issues. And again, you can take it to the point of, when we have pups that are nursing there on the beach and they all spook, then the moms rush off into the water. The pups may stay behind on the beach. That again leaves them for real young pups. I've even seen the gulls attacking them, and I've seen some pretty bad things happen to pups that get abandoned by their parents, and the parents may not be comfortable coming back to the beach for a while because they were really spooked. So I don't like to go to those real negative examples. I like to keep it positive. So, once again, thinking of, is there a good human analogy? And, if you were in the backyard with your family having a picnic and you looked up and you saw a plane plummeting towards your house, it looked like it was going to crash into your house, man, everybody would jump up and they would run as far away as they could to get away from that impending danger. And then you might look around and say, oh my gosh, I got out of the way, but where are my kids? And are they safe? And for any parent, that would send a chill up your spine. So we are kind of triggering those situations out on the beach with a drone. So think about some of those examples that folks might be able to relate to.
I have two questions for you, Jim. Diana asks for some ideas for knowingly uncompliant residents who feel they are the exception to the rules for dogs, drones, etc. So locals.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, so for residents, where this is my beach, I come here every day, and that may well be true. They come there every day, and most days that probably may work out. But there are times of the year when either it's nesting season, it's migration season. There are times when that beach is a necessary habitat for migratory wildlife, for nesting wildlife. And at those specific times, we really need to ask that those animals have the beach to themselves. And we can still go walk on the beach as long as we're careful, but keeping our beach wolf at home can really make a big difference for these animals. And I know you've probably been coming here for years. Those animals have been coming here for thousands of years, and they have no place else to go. Where there's another place, we have another beach that may be more accessible for dogs and less of an impact on wildlife. Would you mind trying that out for a while? So not saying this isn't your beach. I'm glad that people feel like some of those beaches are their personal space. We like people that protect the beach. You come out here every day. I see you picking up trash. You really look out for the beach. And I know having these animals here is probably part of the fun of coming to the beach regularly. And those are all good things. And thank you so much for what you do to take care of the beach. And I'm glad you feel like this is some of your place as well, that you help look out for it. Part of looking out for the beach right now is looking out for these animals that rely on this beach. And it's almost a life or death thing for them. And so again, starting off where you can compliment somebody and pretty much stand in the same square with them, and then just add some information that may change their perspective a little bit. The good part is, if I can convert that one person that's out on the beach every day with their dog, they probably know everybody else that's out on the beach every day with their dog. And the conversation may come around to, I see that you really get it, and I sure appreciate your help with this. And something that would make a huge difference, if you could talk to some of the other people on the beach here and let them know what's going on, then boy, we can make life so much easier for these critters out here. And you can really make my job a lot easier also. And those other people are more likely to listen to you than they are to listen to me anyhow. So if you wouldn't mind helping me out, that would be great. So, give people credit for wanting to do the right thing, and see if you can even enlist their help. And then it's kind of a compliment to those folks. And they may still tell you where to go. And we'll talk about the incorrigible cases here in just a minute. But what we're doing here is really trying to take this positive approach. And the positive approach is not only speaking out for the wildlife, but also holding a lot of respect for the other people that utilize these resources and make our efforts possible. If they weren't there helping to protect that beach and to preserve that resource, then we wouldn't even be having this conversation. So they're already on our side, and they just need a little bit more information to work from so they can make good choices.
So that's beautiful. That's absolutely beautiful. I have another question, or it might be more of a comment. Nicole says, what about challenging people to get the best photo with a drone or cell phone, or otherwise without causing the animal to look at you or flee, like making a game to not disturb wildlife?
Yeah, and that might be something to do also. The one thought I have on that is, you never know if you're disturbing the wildlife till you disturb it. And that's like, oh, okay, I went just a little too far on that one. So just to be cautious about that. But something else you might do is say, I've talked to some other people that use drones. I've actually talked to some professional photographers that use drones. And here's a technique they use, or here's a guideline that they employ so that they can get some really good photos without disturbing the animals or risking disturbance to the animals. So passing along some tips so that in that, and I love that approach, because you're not saying don't do that. You're saying, wow, that's a really cool thing. Here's how you can do that and really minimize or eliminate the potential impact from it. And who isn't going to appreciate that? Wow, they gave me some good tips. And I've got some great photos. And then, yeah, sometimes, if you get a good photo with that, would you send me a copy of it? I'd like to show it off to other people. We could use that in our education programs. So, yeah, again, finding positive ways to address this can make a big difference. All right. So I want to, I've been alluding to this along the way, and something that I'm afraid we have to talk about these days also is, what about interacting with somebody and it just is, no matter how pleasant and positive you are, they just don't respond the same way. And without getting into a lot of kind of brain science, I do want to mention that we humans are equipped with these things called mirror neurons or spindle neurons. And basically what that means is that you tend to mirror or reflect the emotional state of the person you're interacting with. So if you're talking to somebody that is really happy and upbeat and they are smiling and they're, and there's good energy in their voice, inside your brain, there's actually wiring that says, wow, I guess I'm having a good time too. I guess this is pleasant. And likewise, and we probably all had the experience of being around somebody that was profoundly sad, and maybe they were sobbing, and pretty soon you find yourself really feeling sad as well. That's your mirror neurons firing up there, and it's hardwired into your brain. So if you maintain that positive, upbeat, friendly, smiling, affable demeanor when you're interacting with people, they can't help but feel that. Now, they may not just instantly light up and start singing along with you, but they're far less likely to get mad or upset or mean, because that's not what they're seeing. And then to flip that around, if you really get angry with somebody, then their mirror neurons are going to read that and they're going to get angry right back at you. And talk to anybody that's done much law enforcement work, they discover that pretty quickly, that you stay calm and upbeat and positive, then the situation will go in that direction. So thinking about your mental state when you approach somebody makes all the difference in the world. So make sure that you're coming from that place. If you're having a rotten day, or if you're just mad at the world, or, this particular issue just upsets you too much, then you might need to take yourself out of play for that one. When I managed a group of rangers, I used to give my rangers permission to call in ugly, and sometimes they just, I'm in a real ugly mood today and I'm going to cause problems if I show up at work. So I'm taking this day off. And I would allow that because indeed, if they showed up to work and started yelling at people, we had nothing but problems the rest of the day. So think about yourself and your state of mind when you're interacting with people. Can you be positive and upbeat and respectful and enjoy that interaction and go into it with that attitude? Then you are good to go. If that's not the case, then you need to either see what you can do to energize yourself or maybe take yourself out of that particular role for the day. Okay, a couple of other things to think about. Whenever you can work with a partner or work in teams, that's really good. It's not only a useful safety thing, but it's helpful to have sometimes two voices. We all read people differently, and sometimes they will hear one of us and not the other. So sometimes having a couple different people to deliver that message, one of you may relate to that individual better than the other. So that can be very, very helpful. And it can be also helpful in this next point that having somebody that has been part of the experience that day gives you someone to process that experience with. So when you interact with somebody after the fact, sitting down saying, well, how did that go? How did they respond? What worked well? What would we do differently the next time? And each of you is going to have a different read on that experience, and being able to process it and learn from each other, you can get better and better really quickly by helping each other out. And if you have an unpleasant experience, being able to process that also so you can let go of it is really important as well. The reason I bring this up is people are weird right now. We've all been sequestered for so long with COVID, and it has just a lot of the social norms and our social skills at interacting with each other are a little rusty. And so interactions with people that normally would be really pleasant and predictable sometimes just don't come off the way you would expect. And it's like, wow, that person really jumped in a weird direction when we were talking with them. And that can happen. And it's nothing you are doing. It's kind of a product of our state right now, our society, that we're having to get back to how do we behave around other people, because it's been a long time since we've had some practice with that. And especially people that are out in the out of doors. Maybe they're out in the out of doors because they are trying to reset their own brain, and they're trying to get out in nature and get back in touch with their basic values and with themselves and build some good energy again. And when we step into that space, they may not always welcome that. It's like, wow, I was really looking forward to some solitude. It's just me and the surf out here. What are you doing here? So sometimes, and I know a lot of you have been interacting with the public for a long, long time. Right now, some of those interactions may seem like they're going a little bit different than what our experience would tell us. So just being prepared for that and making sure that that doesn't impact your attitude and your commitment to what you're doing is important. And that's why I added these tips about self-care. So try and process the experience you have. If it's positive, share it with others and share your successes. If it's negative, talk to somebody else that can reaffirm the importance of what you're doing and that you're doing it right. And so you don't let that wear you down. Don't take it personally. If somebody says something or does something that might offend you, remember that you're there in a particular role as a champion for the wildlife, and that they're not reacting to who you are as an individual. They're reacting to the role that you are in at this time. That was really important when I was a ranger, because people would get in my face and they would call me some terrible things. And I had to realize they're yelling at the uniform. They are not mad at me as an individual. We're detracting from me as an individual. And I can take the uniform off and I'm still a great person. I put it on, I'm still a pretty good person also, but somebody is going to perceive that uniform differently at times, and they may react to that. So find ways to, when you need to, separate yourself from the job you're doing, from the role you're performing, so that it doesn't drain your personal energy if things aren't, if you're doing a lot of hard work. This is emotional labor. And that emotional labor can really wear you down if you aren't aware of it and take steps to really take care of yourself. And that kind of ties into this next point. Your interactions, especially if you're carrying some bad energy from an interaction with somebody, find the quickest way to leave it behind, talk to somebody else. Don't bring it home with you. That can infect other people that are important in your lives, and it just continues to wear you down. So find a way to leave that behind. I found for myself, when I was driving home from work, I would always have something that I could take off. Maybe it was a uniform, maybe it was my equipment, or even at the aquarium. And I rarely had a bad day at the aquarium, but once in a while, I would have a discussion with somebody. I could take off my name tag and leave it on my desk. And that was symbolic of, okay, I'm leaving the work person behind, and I'm going home and I'm going to be a different person when I walk in the front door at home. And that can just help preserve your own real personal energy, your positive outlook on things, and make sure that this doesn't wear you down from interacting with the public, doing that emotional labor. If you have a negative interaction or less than positive interaction, a bad experience with somebody, don't let that shade your next interaction. And this is kind of a common thing that in law enforcement interactions, you wind up, maybe you pulled somebody over and they yelled at you and called you all kinds of names and just, really upset you, and you did your best to stay professional. And then, you write their ticket or whatever you're going to do. And then later on, you pull somebody over and you're already steamed from that last interaction. You pull somebody over and they're really nice and polite. No, thank you, I didn't realize. And you wind up jumping on them anyhow, because you're still carrying all that negative energy from the last interaction. And then people wonder, why is that person so mean to me? And they weren't trying to do so, and it didn't. And it's just a carryover. It's a shadow effect from a previous interaction. So when you have those interactions, if you're carrying any negative energy away from that interaction, try and put that in a box. Better yet, leave it behind, but try to make sure that that previous experience doesn't taint the next interaction you have with somebody. And then finally, remind yourself, remind others you work with of the good work that we are all doing. And I really wanted to kind of wrap up with this. There we go. That, especially when you're using that voice of the resource, you are literally being the champion for a host of creatures that really can't take care of themselves in their interactions with people. They're perfectly fit for survival in the wild, but when it comes to interacting with people, they need an intermediary, and that's us. You are the champion, and you are there to speak out on behalf of those animals and make sure that they are respected and that they have the right to survive as well. And when we do that successfully, there's no greater feeling than helping somebody understand how they can make a difference in a real positive way. And it's hard work at times. It's tremendously rewarding and hugely important. And I really appreciate everybody devoting their time and energy to doing this kind of work. I just had to throw in this. I hate to say how many years ago that was, but it was well over 4 decades ago. This was Ranger Jim talking to a group of kindergarten kids in a nature area out in a park in Sacramento. And tell you, in my whole career, some of the things I look back on most fondly, are those times when I got to share wildlife experiences with people and engender that real positive relationship with wildlife. And I tell you, when you can do that with kids and families, that is going to carry them for the rest of their lifetime, and you are making a huge difference. So never doubt that the work you do, no matter how difficult it might be on any given day, is incredibly important and has a real lasting impact. So, more questions? I can stop sharing here.
Okay, I'm looking. I don't see anything yet. Just a lot of good comments. One of the reasons I wear a uniform and or name tag. Yes, so important for uniform employees to remember.
I have to tell you also, having worked in a uniform, when you go out there in uniform and you have that positive interaction with somebody, then they also walk away thinking, wow, those people really care. They care about me. They care about the resource they're protecting. They're good people and they're doing a good job. And that carries over to everybody else that they see wearing that uniform. So when any one of us has a great interaction, then it makes everybody's job easier and it lifts us all in the eyes of the public that we serve. So I think those positive interactions are really, really critical for any member of a uniformed organization.
Definitely. There was a good comment about social media from Nancy. She says these tips apply to those of us managing social media too. You were talking about being in a good headspace and being able to call in ugly if you need to. Yeah. So if you take social media personally, then that would be very dangerous. So just, yeah.
Because people will say things on social media they would never dare say to your face. And talk about emotional labor. There's a particular category of that for people who work on social media. But also, if you're doing social media, remember that you have an opportunity to put this information in the hands of people before they even get on site. That for a lot of those people that we may encounter out in the field, maybe the day before or on the trip to that particular site, they looked at social media and they're getting some information about what they can see, what they can do. And you have a chance to reach people with good information about how to have a minimal impact when it counts the most. So we're not stepping into their experience. We're actually reaching them before they even start that experience. And that can have a real important effect on people. So social media is really critical in this process. And so thank you for what you do on social media. I know it doesn't necessarily have all the rewards of positive face-to-face interactions that we have.
I wish I could have quoted you in my most recent grant application with what you just said.
Perfect.
I'm going to remember that in the future.
We have quite a few questions, so I'll just start at the first one. Thank you. That the social media is a great tie to our next workshop as well, which is all about social media and wildlife disturbance. The first question is, we just had a couple of staff at NOAA caution us against anthropomorphizing animals, especially seals. I really like your tips, but do you think they are approaching anthropomorphism? How do we draw human comparisons but emphasize that animals are wild?
Yeah, and you know, I've turned into a real fan of anthropomorphism, and looking at kind of what I see people writing up in terms of interpretation, that humans, the only way we have to view other living creatures is through our own eyes and our own experience. That is the definition of anthropomorphism. So if I am trying to get somebody to relate to another living thing, I have to start with their experience and then try and tie that to another living thing. And some people would say, well, that's anthropomorphism, and maybe it is. And maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing, that once people can relate to another living thing, then we can start to go into, so here's kind of how their situation is similar and here's how it's different. And our brains tend to categorize information by similar and different. And so let's start with what we have in common, and then let's go to how things are different. And through anthropomorphism, you can be, it's a lot more effective entree into that conversation, and eventually bringing it to the point of, here's why this applies to that animal, and we can't take our experience. You might love your dog and your dog loves you, but if you were a bird, that would be different. Even though you bring your dog here and you think your dog wants to interact with those birds, the birds are seeing it a different way. So starting out with, that anthropomorphic approach sometimes is the way we find that common ground. And so we shouldn't just automatically condemn anthropomorphism. It can be a useful technique.
Cara,
Jim.
can I comment on that?
Oh.
So I actually wrote a paper when I was an undergrad about examples of anthropomorphism, and I have really come full circle, and I really like what you just said, because there is a distinction between helping people to understand the ways that we're similar. So we're a mammal relating to a mammal, a warm-blooded animal relating to a warm-blooded animal. We have needs. We reproduce. We need to stay sheltered. We need to stay warm. We need to stay fed, survive. All these things we have in common, and I think there are becoming fewer and fewer examples of that we've used over centuries to separate ourselves from animals. Humans are humans because they use tools, or because they feel pain, or they feel emotion, and all of these things are sort of getting crossed off that list one by one. And so I think we're realizing that we have a lot more in common than we have dissimilarities. But then you made the really good point that there's sort of another side of that, where the example that I like to use is a person who's living on a boat on a dock, and their dog is interacting with the sea otter, and they're calling that play because they're interpreting that from their human perspective, but they're not really understanding what the individual animals that are participating are doing. So that's maybe a different way of anthropomorphizing that's not so helpful. And in fact, it actually ended up in that dog losing its life. Whether it was play or interaction or whatever it was for the sea otter, it was fatal for the dog. So anyway, I just think that's really important. And I really, I don't know if Virginia, if you want, you can unmute yourself if you want to come in and ask more about your question, because I think it is really important, the distinction between empathy and also, being a little more objective in your interpretation of animal behavior.
I for sure believe in using those universal concepts in best interpretation, and we know that we cannot connect to someone unless they can feel something for the resource, and that it's our job to forge that connection. And it's not the dangerous anthropomorphism that we're talking about, where you are like, oh, my dog's playing with the sea otters. That's dangerous. But we're just forging the connection, but then we are clarifying the differences. So that's the way I see it. But
Virginia, did you want to comment on your question at all?
No, well, thank you for all of these tips. And, I really am here on behalf of all of our educators and docents who are on the Laguna Coast every day. It's year round now. There's no such thing as summer's peak season, but it's everyone's there all the time, all year round. And what I have that you have shared with me are tips that we can provide to our docents and our educators on the rocks, because a lot of them work by themselves. I think we have to find a way for them to partner up and to maybe, not be traumatized by the bad experiences that they've had. So, I think it's advice that we have to, we take your advice and we take the NOAA staff's advice and we figure out what works best in the situation that we're in. I really think that the more tools we have and one of the things that we're trying to develop too are some standard responses, or for new people that are just getting out and starting their interpreting, some tools for them to look at, things that they can say, ways to connect with the people that are visiting the tide pool. So, I think everything that you've said so far is invaluable, but it's ultimately it's a situation by situation, and whatever they think is appropriate at the time that can really get the visitor to understand. I think that's really the thing, is understand and then act. So I appreciate everything that's presented here.
All right, we have a bunch more questions. Are you ready? Okay, so any tips for someone who is just visiting the beach and is not uniformed or identified as a volunteer and doesn't work there, but sees disturbance or other issues and wants to approach the person? I've often gotten the "Do you work here?" question.
Yeah, that starting those conversations can feel a little more awkward, because it's like, what grounds do I have to talk to that person? But at the same time, just as a fellow beachgoer, it's like, wow, are you having a good time at the beach today? I come out here a lot. I love this beach. I hope you do too. And or I talk to a lot of people with dogs out on the beach. It's like, oh man, you have a cool dog, and can I pet your dog? And I find that's a great entree. And of course, everybody loves it when you admire their dog. And then I just, you can come around to, hey, I learned something really cool the other day, and kind of pass that along. That or some of the other people with dogs here on the beach have found this. So just as kind of spontaneously sharing something that you've discovered, or something that is going to enhance their visit to the beach as a fellow beachgoer. So having those, using that approach to the conversation can help also. Just, hey, I'm excited to be here today also. And, but again, if you see somebody admiring something, or we didn't even get into tide pooling today, but certainly somebody's out there tide pooling. It's like, wow, this is one of the best low tides of the year. I love coming out here. What have you seen so far? Those are conversations that you don't have to be an official representative to have, just as another person enjoying that same space. And sometimes people look at you like, get away from me. And it's like, okay, try something else, or maybe this is just not the time and place to have that interaction. And a couple times I have used the ruse of, it's, hey, I noticed the ranger's truck parked up there, and they may be looking for this, or they might be telling people about this. And so you may want to, just a heads up. And so I've used that sometimes as a pretext for having a conversation. If somebody's doing something that is kind of questionable, it's like, oh, I was out here a couple of weeks ago with my drone, and one of the rangers or somebody came by and told me about this. So I'm just passing it along. I'd hate to see you, get into trouble also.
Thank you. Next question is, what would you say to a person throwing stones at an elephant seal, a young person? Oh. These are recovering bulls on Hearst Beach.
Okay. And again, I'd probably stop for a minute and think about why they're doing that, and probably just to get a reaction from the animal. So, I might go over and just say, let's just watch that elephant seal for a minute. And if you look carefully, you can see a couple things. They're breathing, they might twitch a little bit, but they're not going to move much. And throwing rocks at them is not going to make them move much either, unless they really get upset. And so let's look at how we can look at their reactions and how come they're not doing anything more than that, and talk about what they're doing laying up there on the beach and how that's so important. And again, I might go back to, does your family ever go to the beach and everybody just spreads out a towel and smears on the suntan lotion and they just lay there in the sand for a while, and they wouldn't want anybody throwing rocks at them. They're just there to relax and catch some rays and rest and regain some energy. So maybe help explain what's going on and why throwing rocks isn't going to make much of a difference, other than it can just upset the animal. And boy, when they get upset, they can really move, and then it's not safe for anybody else nearby. So I want to make sure that you don't wind up being, a flat spot in the sand also. So, but I think looking at their motivation for why they're doing that, and is there some way that they can, they can understand what kind of reaction they could look for. And I might start the conversation with, wow, you got a pretty good arm there. Do you play softball? And, pitching rocks here, though, is not going to get you what you're looking for. And it could wind up causing some real problems.
Thank you. That's awesome. Next question says, you have had quite the career, Jim. Can you share an anecdote of a memorable experience you had in handling an interaction in which you experienced a positive or unexpected outcome? Working in the parks, I've had some interactions where I had to talk to people about things they were doing that weren't necessarily wildlife interactions. These would be, maybe sometimes it was just littering, or, kids playing with matches, or just other, things that are really inappropriate out in the park. But I would sit down and just, instead of saying knock it off, I'd sit down and say, hey, how you doing? Who are you? What's going on here? And we would chat for a while and say, this is not only a problem right here and now, but man, believe it or not, I've had 3 grass fires in the last week around this park, and we're spending all of our time fighting fires instead of being able to go out and interpret and tell people about all the cool stuff in the parks. And ultimately, those people wound up being more eyes and ears for me. And they would call and say, hey, I just saw a guy riding a bicycle flicking matches along the trail, and here's where he was and what he looked like. And that made my job as a ranger a whole lot easier, having, literally dozens of deputy rangers out there in the community that were keeping an eye on their parks to try and make sure that nobody was harming their resource. And literally, that was the only way I could have done my job as a ranger, was cultivating those relationships with people. So all of these interactions, I always looked at, here is my next junior ranger. Here is my next park steward. Here is my next helper. And this is my chance to convert them to really having a sense of ownership and pride and helping me, helping all of us take better care of these resources. Thank you. Next question. Not all communities are comfortable with someone in a uniform approaching them. Have you encountered this? How have you adapted to those situations?
And that, again, going back to my ranger days where I worked in Sacramento County, was at a time when we had a lot of immigrants from Southeast Asia and Vietnam in particular. And in their experience, anybody in a uniform was pretty much their to shoot somebody. That's all they'd seen of uniforms was military actions. And so when they saw somebody in uniform, they really panicked. And so you had all that going before you ever walked up and said hi. So trying to soften your image as much as possible. And that came down to your posture and how you walked, and certainly your facial expressions, so that you were putting out all the nonverbal signals of, hey, I have this uniform on, but that's better than walking around here in my birthday suit. And I really am here as a good guy to help people enjoy this place. And that's where I'm coming from. And I found that really having that positive, friendly demeanor and smiling made a big difference in how people perceived me, even at a distance, before I ever got to come up and say hi. So yeah, when you have a uniform on, that sometimes can be one strike against you before you even have a chance to interact with people. So being aware of that and doing everything you can to put out all those positive vibes to try and overcome the uniform, and that can make a real difference. People pick up on that. Get those mirror neurons, the good ones, firing.
Awesome. All right. Next question is, for high tourism areas, what suggestions do you have for communicating wildlife viewing guidelines?
So, and these are for high what areas?
High tourism areas.
High tourism areas, yeah, where you have a constant turnover of people and you're never going to see them again. They're there for a few minutes and then they're moving on. And that can be a challenge. This again is where I thank our social media people, because maybe they can reach folks before they get to that site. If they are with any kind of a guide, then working through the guides can really help a lot, because they're there on a regular basis. If it's just people pulling off the highway and looking at elephant seals and those kinds of things. Sometimes if there is a portal or kind of a gateway, okay, everybody's got to walk from the parking lot through this space to get to where they're going, then that may give you a chance to post somebody there and say, you are about to see this, and here's a couple of tips, and please be aware of this. So that everybody has to kind of get by you and get a little bit of an indoctrination about how to do things appropriately before they can move into where they're interacting with the wildlife or looking at wildlife. If it's a real dispersed high tourism area, I've seen some pretty effective signs. Some of the memes that Jenna has put out there have made a big difference. Some of those visuals communicate things in a matter of seconds to people. And so I'm always a fan of face-to-face interactions, because you can see how people are receiving the message. But sometimes in a real dispersed, high traffic area, having some of those high impact images can make a big difference, because people just walking by see it and get it. And they may choose to ignore it, but it can plant a seed with them. And so the other thing I'll say is, in these high tourism areas, if all of us are engaged in this effort, then there's a cumulative impact also. So maybe that person talked to a volunteer at the aquarium, and they learned a little bit about wildlife interactions out on our deck, and then they hopped on a bus or hopped in their car with a family and they drove down to San Simeon, and they're going to get out and look at elephant seals, but they're remembering the conversation that we had at the aquarium or at Moss Landing or someplace else. And so when you look at collectively all the different sites we represent and how many millions of people we all touch, then there's a carryover from one situation to the next. And especially if other people are helping us spread the word, then it is possible, when you look at our collective impact, to feel like maybe we are turning the tide a little bit. And that just, again, reinforces how important this work is for all of us.
Thank you, Jim. That's last question that I'm showing in here, unless anyone has something else they want to put in the chat, or if you want to unmute, if you've been waiting, this is your chance to get a personalized answer from our expert. And you're getting a lot of very great feedback on the chat. I hope you can see all that. And some really, really good comments. I was asking Jenna, I'm hoping we can save the chat and then we'll post it in the Padlet, because there are some great conversations going on in there too. So.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate everybody's contributions in the chat, because, you know, I am just one person with my own experience. When you multiply that by all the good minds that are here with us today and adding what you have discovered along the way collectively, you know, we're coming up with some great stuff here. One of my favorite sayings is, none of us is as smart as all of us. And when collectively we all share this, and this is why I encouraged you, when you have wrapped up your shift as a volunteer or employee, if there's a few minutes for you to sit down and just share, okay, I did this today. I discovered a really good technique. Wow, people responded well to this. We can all help each other get better and better and better by sharing in venues like this, as well as our own specific sites where we work.
Your message about our collective impact is so moving and such an appropriate way to end this workshop, that I really, really appreciate that, because that's really why we're here today. And so it's like the perfect way to wrap up this day, this morning session. Just a reminder, everybody, there's a separate link for this afternoon session where we're going to take a deep dive into social media and wildlife issues with our panel of, I have to say, quote unquote experts, because none of them want to be called experts, but they kind of are. So join us for that. Let's see, that starts, let me just double check, at 10:40. So we're going to take a quick break here, so you have a chance to stretch your legs. And I just want to take a moment to announce our symposium planning team, who's been working very hard to plan everything that you've seen over yesterday and today, and to make the webinar and today's workshops run smoothly. So if you guys, when I say your name, if you could just turn on your video and give everybody a wave. Of course, Cara is amazing. And we have Andy Johnson from Defenders of Wildlife, Francesca Mannheim from California State Parks, Nicole Palma from Marine Protected Area Collaborative, Heather Barrett from Sea Otter Savvy. And am I forgetting anybody, Cara? You're muted still. Think I've got everybody.
Bill Stanley.
Oh, Bill Stanley. Bill Stanley. Thank you so much, everybody who helped out. And we will see you all in about 10 minutes for workshop number 2. Thank you so much, Jim.
I also want to, yay, thank you. That was amazing. Jenna, I also want to call out Jenna. She puts her heart and soul into this and does the bulk of the planning, and we're really, really grateful to you, Jenna. You work really hard.
Thank you. Thanks, Cara. My pleasure.